I guess typically when we think about fishing for GTs, it's something we'd normally kind of associate with being out in a boat around some rocky headland or reef or pressure point of some type and hurling around oversized poppers, 200, 250 millimeter big gooseneck poppers. But it doesn't always have to be like that. In fact, today's ALF podcast guest is all about big GTs land-based. And in fact, pulling some seriously big fish out of some surprisingly shallow water. Now, there's a lot to be said about this. I mean, for one, you don't have to worry about going a long way offshore, a large fuel bill, picking the right weather windows, or even having access to a boat for that matter. So all of that immediately makes targeting big GTs a lot more accessible to a lot more people. And then throw on top of that you don't have a long trip out to the reef and back. And that means all of a sudden you can go GT fishing even if you've only got a couple of hours to spare. You can sneak in a few casts after work or before work or whatever other commitments you might have. So once again, making GT fishing so much more accessible. Now, you'll notice I've said accessible, not easy. There's no such thing as easy when it comes to GTs. But I'll tell you what, today's guest has been doing some amazing things on GTs, but also queenfish, barra, coral trout, and a whole range of other species that can be captured shorebound around central Queensland. So, folks, let's head off to Bowen today. Let's catch up with our guest and find out all about shore-based fishing for GTs.
This is the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast, where our mission is to help everyday sports fishers experience extraordinary lure fishing. If next level fishing is your dream, then let us provide the tools and information that will bring that dream to life. Tune in as our expert hosts chat with Australia's best anglers and share their tips for success. Then check out our website. It's one of Australia's largest and most popular online fishing resources. But right now, settle in to listen as ALF founder Greg Doc Lures Vinall delivers today's episode through the nerdy lens of a scientist, lure maker, and sport fishing tragic.
Hello, ALF listeners. Welcome to a brand new episode. In fact, episode 680 of the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast. And looking forward, as usual, to an awesome chat with an awesome angler and getting some great tips about how to catch some fish on lures, this time around central Queensland. And our guest today is Brett Mengler. Welcome to the show, Brett.
G'day, Greg. Thanks very much for having me.
My absolute pleasure, mate. I've been really looking forward to this chat because we're going to be talking about fishing around central Queensland. We're going to be talking about doing it land-based, though, mate. And, looking at your profile, tons and tons and tons of great pics there. All kinds of species from GTs and queenies, which are probably what we're going to focus on mostly in this episode. But the coral trout and finger mark and huskies, all kinds of stuff, barrow, all kinds of stuff that you're taking off the rocks around central Queensland. And, mate, we're going to mine your brain a little bit, get a few tips about how we can possibly do the same thing ourselves. But before we do that, let's just take a little bit of time to get to know you just a little bit better. I know that you're based in the Bowen area, mate, and that you love targeting the queenies and the GTs, they're your main species. But if you were fishing somewhere else, maybe in an estuary or somewhere else around central Queensland, what other species do you like to throw lures at?
Oh, yeah. Mangrove jack, barramundi. Yeah, they're probably the main two. I love a feed of flathead, so I love to chase those guys for a bit of a feed. And then recently I've been getting into the flats fishing a lot. So I'm chasing golden trevally on the flats, finding them tailing and stuff like that has been really rewarding. Yeah.
Nice stuff. Yep. I've got a good friend and colleague who lives in Bowen, very serious fly fisher who rates the flats at Bowen as some of the best in Australia. And this is a man who would know his flats fishing extremely well. So you're in the right spot for that, mate.
Yep. No, it's been good. It's been a new thing I'm learning and been getting into it and loving it.
Yeah, terrific stuff. All right, now if you were to, and don't ask me why you do this, given what we've just talked about, but if you were to head off to some other part of Australia for a week, and imagine you didn't have a mobile phone, didn't have a computer, all you had was a fishing rod, box of lures and your own company, where would you like to spend a week fishing, mate, and why?
Probably Jarvis Bay. It's a bit of the mecca for the land-based game anglers. Some amazing catches have come out of Jarvis Bay down there. Everything up to marlin, a lot of kingfish and tuna and stuff like that in the recent years. So, yeah, that would definitely be one that I'd look to spend a bit of time there for sure.
Yeah, definitely a place to go if you like your land-based game fishing stuff. That's one of the hot spots in Australia and probably in the world, I would say.
Yeah.
Terrific. Mate, there's just a swag of species on your profile, as I said, but is there a species that you haven't caught yet? Is there one that's eluded you that you'd like to tick off before you kick off?
Yeah, definitely kingfish. I've
Okay.
seen them, I've casted at them, I've had them follow lures. I've had a couple of big strikes on poppers, but I just haven't stayed connected and I haven't got that one on the bank yet. But I'm the kind of fisherman I like to leave some ends open. That keeps the sport interesting for me, I think. I think other people like to just fill the list and just keep more and more. So there's some certain fish that I like to keep as the white whale, the thing that really keeps me interested in fishing, and it's like a one day sort of thing.
I love that, mate. And I'll tell you, you're the second person out of well over 500 people that I've interviewed over the last few years on the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast. You're only the second person who's said that, and the other one was Paul Worsteling of iFish fame. You're in good company, mate.
Yeah.
He said the same thing. There was a species that he hadn't caught, but he didn't want to because it was that one thing that was going to be unattainable for him, that he liked having that sort of mystery and that one thing that was still there to be solved one day maybe. So
yeah,
love all of that. Now, mate, land-based fishing, I'd imagine there's probably a few things you might do different than if you're in a boat. Do you have any favourite gadgets or pieces of technology that you take with you fishing from the shore?
Not really. And to be honest, that's probably one thing that I have been gravitating towards land-based fishing. And what I'm drawn to it by is there's a simplicity in it. It's very basic. It's a man and a backpack and a rod. And you might take a few extra things in that, but at the core, that is what it is. And the simpler, the better. I have been enjoying doing a bit of filming with the GoPro the last few years. That's always been good to capture this sort of thing. So not everything's a bit of just a wild fisherman's tale when you tend to get out on the rocks or fishing by yourself a lot, as I do. You know, you get some funny looks sometimes with the things. You see some amazing things, and to try and capture some of that stuff on GoPro has been pretty rewarding in the last few years.
Yeah. And as the saying goes, if there's no photo, if there's no video, it didn't happen. And unfortunately,
that's right.
A lot of people take that attitude these days.
Yeah.
So that's a nice element to fishing anyway, I think, is to try and capture some video while you're at it and have those memories stored away on an SD card somewhere for later reference. But I do appreciate what you're saying, particularly as you just this evening, there's been some techie issues, and sometimes it's nice to walk away from the technology and go to a much simpler place where all you're doing is casting a few lures and not having to think too much, and not having to be bothered by technology anyway.
Yeah, it's good. This day and age, it's a rare thing to get away from it. But yeah, that's one thing that land-based fishing offers.
Reel just recently, it was a young lady who she'd gone off and was off the grid for a few days, and she put this little video together, which is a little bit ironic because then she came back and posted it. But she made a point that she actually needed to be bored, because when she's within mobile reception, she's always on her phone. But when you get outside of mobile reception and there's no phone to look at, there's no internet to look at, you've got nature and you've got what's around you, there's something to be said for that, and it does help you to just replenish your soul a little bit, I think. But then, of course, you went straight back into technology and posted the video of it.
Yeah, no, there's definitely great value at getting, even for a day or so, or even a few hours, just off the grid, away from the phone, away from the TV. There's so much of that sort of stimulus and distractions these days that I think a lot of people would find it quite refreshing, if they haven't done before, is to just go for an extended walk along the foreshore somewhere, observing nature, hunting fish, looking for signs of fish, stuff like that. Yeah, you really get absorbed in it. So yeah, I find great value in it.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of people who may be new to fishing, or maybe even some that are not so new to fishing, and they feel like unless you're in a boat or unless you're on a kayak, you're not going to catch quality fish. But nothing can be further from the truth. There's plenty of fish to be caught land-based. I know we've talked with Luke Gallier over at Mackay there on a number of occasions, and Luke makes the point that he's got a boat, but he still goes land-based fishing a fair bit, because he can do it before work, he can do it after work, he can do it in a couple of hours. There's no boat cleanup to do afterwards, there's no launching. You can just go out and do it, and it's a great way to just be able to hit the water, get a couple of hours of R&R, replenish the batteries, and then get back to whatever you're doing.
That's it, and that's one of the main catalysts that made me want to come on and talk, as well as for that reason, is just, that there is that much technology and stuff these days, and a lot of the stuff you see online or on YouTube and stuff like that is just all these guys with gadgets. There's, you know, drone fishing, sending drones up to find fish. There's live scope. There's the top of the range sounders. There's, you got to head out to the barrier reef to do all this. But all of my best catches have literally been within an hour of home, and just putting in that effort and just getting out, enjoying nature, and just putting your mind to something, and persistence and observation, and that's all you really need. And like I said, sometimes it's just a couple of hours, and that's all that's required. It's just a couple of hours of your time quite regularly, and you will see great rewards.
And it keeps you sane as well, mate.
That's right. And exercise too, if you're into land-based or you're thinking about getting into it. It is exercise. That's another thing too. Sometimes that's the only reason I'll go. It's just to get a little bit of exercise. I'll go, look, I need to get outside today, stretch the legs, go for a walk. And that leads to just looking at a new spot, just doing, we'll probably talk a bit more about it later, but observation. And so that'll just be me driving to a new spot. I might have a rod in the car. Sometimes I might not. And I'll just go for a walk and I'll just observe what's happening. And you'll see, on this bit of tide, might usually run out at a river mouth, something you're saying, there's a back eddy there and there's bait getting pushed into the shallows here. And then there's fish coming in and wrecking them. And then you'll know to go back at that time. And, you know, it was just, and the only reason I would go out and find that sort of information is just because I wanted to get out. So I'd get a bit of exercise, but observation in my eyes is still fishing. Even if you're not casting lines or casting lures, just walking around, observing the water, observing the environment, looking for signs, you know, all that observation stuff is still fishing. And sometimes that's just a good reason to get out of the house, stretch the legs, get a bit of fresh air, get a bit of exercise, but you're still fishing even though you're not actually using a rod and reel. In my eyes, still fishing.
Yeah, 100%, mate. And look, one of the things that comes through loud and clear when I talk to some of the top anglers, and this is boating anglers as well, fishing tournaments and that kind of stuff, they often say the people are too quick to want to put a line in the water. And quite often some of these guys, I remember talking to Nabil Issa, for example, down on Moreton Bay, down around Brisbane, he was saying sometimes he'll go out in the boat, he'll spend a whole day and won't even put a line in the water. He's studying the sounder, he's marking locations, he's looking for fish. If he finds a good aggregation of fish, then he'll stop and drop a lure in. Otherwise, he won't. There's a lot to be said for taking that time to understand the systems and not just rushing in and throwing lures and wondering why you're not catching fish. So I love all of that. And for me, as I'm sure it is for you, I had to toss up between hitting the gym and getting on a treadmill and doing some weights, or getting out for a walk and casting some lures at a GT. I know a form of exercise suits me a bit better. All right, mate, so before we go on and start talking about fishing, let's talk about somebody that you'd like to spend a day fishing with, mate. If you could go out for a day, walking around the rocky coastlines of central Queensland, casting lures at all kinds of species with one individual in particular, who would you like to go out for a fish with?
Oh, geez, that's a good question. I'm a little bit of a loner. I like solitude, and I tend to fish alone a lot. So my mate Drew Bevans down in Sydney, he's just a top bloke and another land-based angler, and I haven't fished with him for a long time, and he would be I reckon, number one pick would be Drew Bevans.
Right. Hopefully Drew's listening in, and maybe you can hook up for a fishing trip, mate.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's on the cards.
All right, mate, last of our kind of getting to know you questions, and then I want to get stuck into the interview. So tell us about your most memorable land-based fishing session in central Queensland. Tell us what you did, what you caught, and why it was such a great day.
Yeah, it was one of those ones, like I was mentioned earlier, it was neap tide, so bad tides for the spot or the fish I was targeting. So I was going out to target Giant Trevally on poppers, and I went out, I was at neap tide, there was nothing special about it, nothing special about the day, a bit sunny, spring day, and I took a walk. I think it was about a 4-kilometre walk sort of thing from the car. It can be hard in the northern half of the country, like putting in those hours walking with a backpack and all that. It can be hard. So it wasn't a very good day fishing. There wasn't much happening. And I went around a couple of points, and I finally got to a spot, and I just put my bag down and was just observing, like we spoke about earlier. I was just looking at the area before you start, especially with top water fishing and poppers and stuff like that. Sometimes it's good to observe first, so you're not disturbing anything that's happening naturally. Sometimes putting in the wrong presentation will spook fish off. Whereas I've found if you took a bit of time to observe, you would have maybe noticed something that would have put you in a bit better stead to put the right lure in front of them, whether that be color or size. A lot of the times it's just size. So if they're feeding on bait that's as long as your finger, throwing a 200 mil lure around will just spook them off, whereas all you would have had to do was drop the size and they'd eat it instantly. So I was just observing, and I looked down and there was just a monstrous giant trevally just milling around in the shallows. And I put a cast in, not at him, but off to the side of him, about 10 meters out off him to try and get him, if he did eat it, because he had run away from me from where I was putting tension on, he'd run into clear ground and not over, there's coral bommies and rubble and shallow, what you call coral flats. And he come up, he tried to eat it and missed it, and he went down, and 95% of the time you get the one chance and that's it. And thankfully I put another short cast in and 2 pops, and he just come up and thumped it, and this fish dumped, like I run pretty heavy drag on like a 18,000 size Catalina reel of P8, pretty heavy drag and P8 rod, and he had this rod buckled and took about 100 meters of line, just nothing you can do but lean back into it. And I got that fish eventually after not too long a fight, but for a heavy gear, what I'd class as a long fight, and it would have been in excess of 30 kilos. That's the one that stands out. And that was the one fish that got me into filming too, because it was in the shallows, clear water, just an absolute extraordinary fish, like a very large fish to see milling around in the shallows. It's something that guys on the reef and stuff like that probably experience, but for someone that's only done really land-based fishing, it was just one of those things that you could fish your whole life, you'd never see something like that unfold. And thankfully I got that fish on the bank, and it all come in my favor. But that's my favorite catch, and that's the one I always go back to.
There is so much to pull apart in that story that you've just told. There's more than what I'm going to pull out here, but a couple of things that I want our listeners to pick up here. One is, it was a neap tide. Wasn't the best tide for fishing, but you know what? You still walked 4Ks with your rod and your backpack and went out and had a look anyway, because fish don't always come on the perfect tides. And if you're waiting for the perfect tide all the time, you spend a lot of time sitting at home and not actually fishing. You get out there, you have a fish, there's some kind of chance you're going to catch a fish even if the tide's not perfect. And this is a classic example of that. I love that you sat and observed the fish first rather than just sling a lure in there and spook it. You didn't rush, you figured out what was going on, made the right lure choice. And of course, and this is the hallmark of a great land-based or experienced land-based angler, is you've picked where you're going to play that fish. You've figured out where to position yourself, where to cast, the angle to cast, so that fish, when it runs, is going to keep as clear as you can keep it away when you're land-based from all of the structure that you want to keep it out of. And you've got a place to bring it in and land it as well and get your photos. So, mate, all of those are the hallmarks of an experienced land-based angler, and exactly why we have you on this show today to help our listeners to understand what they need to do to be able to catch fish like that as well. So, fantastic story. So, mate, what I would like to do now is actually get right into the meat and potatoes of the interview. I really want to start talking about everything that we need to know for those who are interested in land-based coastal fishing around central Queensland. And by central Queensland, we're talking anywhere from Hervey Bay all the way up to basically Townsville. I'm a bit geographically challenged. Technically, some of those areas would be considered not to be central Queensland, but we're going to call that, for the purpose of this particular discussion, central Queensland, because I would imagine what we're going to be talking about applies across that whole area, yes?
Yep.
So I know you moved up to central Queensland from southeast Queensland. I know that you were a land-based fisher down in southeast Queensland as well. You've been in the Bowen area for about 3 years.
Yep.
Tell us something that you've learned about land-based fishing in that part of the world that the average angler might not think of or might not understand until they get out and give it a go.
Well, probably the main things is there's areas that'll be dry at low tide that in a high tide, there'll be all sorts of stuff going on there. And the tides here aren't huge either. 3.5 meters here is a massive tide. We'll lose a lot. We'll get down to 30 centimeters because I'm talking spring tides. You do get bigger tides in other areas, but specifically here, On the biggest we'll get is like a 3-meter run. But even on small tides,
Yep.
there's areas that are pretty much dry at low tide, and then at high tide, there's stuff happening there, which is I don't know. I find that super interesting. Coming from southeast Queensland, there's not that much tidal flow and stuff like that. So I find that really interesting. Just we all sort of gravitate towards deep water and stuff like that, but seeing fish in shallow water is unbelievable. And yeah, the way they move up here, and they almost, some fish especially, will wait for that incoming, that high tide, to come in and have a look at certain areas where, you know, it will be full dry at low tide, and then there's even like 1.5 meters of water, 2 meters of water max, and there's all sorts of stuff going on in there.
Is it a bit like beach fishing, where you know, a lot of beach fishers talk about you got high tide gutters and you got low tide gutters, right? So the low tide gutters are out of casting range when the tide's up, but that's where you're going to cast if you're fishing on the lower tide. And then the high tide gutters obviously are further up the beach, and they might be dry at low tide. Is it the same sort of thing? Can you fish any tide? But yeah, yes,
definitely. And land-based fishing, especially, each spot has got its little Goldilocks time. Like, some of them are low tide spots, some of them are high tide spots, some of them southeast facing, some of them are north facing. So all that comes into play.
Yeah, okay. That's a really important point, and that's something that I find a lot of anglers will be focused on a particular tide, and you hear them say the high tides always fish best, or the last half of the run-in tide, or the first half of the run-out tide, or whatever. And I think that often is because they have become accustomed to fishing a particular location or a particular spot where that's the case. But if they then learn to fish other spots, then other tides might fish better as well. But I love that you don't have to necessarily not go fishing because it's low tide. You just need to know where to go and what to look for.
Yep. If you put a reasonable amount of time on the water in your local area, you'll build up a database of spots, your low tide spots, your high tide spots, your run out spots, your run in spots. And that's really what you want. It's just put those hours in on the water, or even just observing, and then you'll just build up a database of your spots that work at different times.
Yeah. Do you keep a diary of any sort, or use an app to keep track?
No,
or is it just
I like the idea of doing it. I love the idea of doing it.
Yep.
I have been toying with keeping records, and I have tried to in the past, but I just never stick to it. Love the idea of it. Yeah, theoretically, I reckon that's the way to go. If people are inclined to do that kind of stuff, that's the best way to go for sure.
Yep. Okay, cool. All right. So talk to us about how you approach planning for a trip, mate. So let's say you were maybe going to some section of coastline that you haven't fished before, and you don't really know what tides are going to fish best because you haven't been there before. How do you go about figuring out what you're going to do, putting together a bit of a game plan for the day? Let's say you're going for a whole day.
All right. Yep. So I guess one of the first ones is we all love a bit of Google Maps, a bit of satellite view, figure out which way the headland or bay or whatever is facing, and then look at the wind and figure out, basically, you're either going to want to be casting into the wind or with it at your back. Crosswinds and stuff like that, they tend to just become problematic with staying connected with the lure because of bows in the line and stuff like that. But generally, that'll be the first one, is just figure out where the wind's coming from, and then the geography, and then just put yourself in, either you want to be sending out big casts for pelagics out wide, so you probably want the wind behind you, or if you're fishing for more inshore species like Giant Trevally especially, you might want wind in your face, because that wind, especially with tide, with current, is going to just move heaps of water in straight at you. And casting far, unless there's something you're casting at, like a rock formation or a reef edge or something like that, which is uncommon, generally you don't need to cast that far. So casting distance isn't an issue. So if it's like Giant Trevally or queenfish, casting distance isn't an issue, and I'd be casting into the wind. And so depending on the wind direction, I'd just be picking a point or rocky outcrop that's facing into the wind. But if I was going for like Spanish or tuna or pelagics or something like that, then I might be going with the wind behind me and trying to pick some big geographic area where the wind's behind me and I'm casting into some deeper water with the wind behind me to get those long casts out. That would be the first step, cool. And then if I can, I'll try and get some idea of water depth. That's always a big one, but it's amazing, and it never ceases to amaze me how shallow big fish will come in.
Yeah, that's come across loud and clear, and I'm really glad you made that point, because I think a lot of people will overlook those areas where maybe it's only half a metre deep or a metre deep.
Yeah.
But they can hold pretty good fish. And when a big GT or a big queenfish is in that shallow water, they're only there for one reason. They're not there to have a holiday. They're in there feeding and actively hunting.
That's exactly right.
Those fish are primed to be targeted. So that gives us a bit of an idea on the planning side of things. One of the things I tend to do a lot when I'm planning a trip is I'll look to see not just what the wind's doing today, but what the wind's been doing over the last few days, because that can help set up currents and things as well, and push bait and flotsam and jetsam and all kinds of stuff into particular areas that might hold fish. So I tend to look at that as well.
Yep.
What about the tide side of things, mate? And when you're fishing a new spot, is it just a kind of, okay, I've had a look at Google Maps, I've had a look at the satellite imagery, now I'm just going to go and take a punt, get there at whatever tide and walk around and figure it out?
Yeah, really it is. Just go there and figure it out. And I kind of feel like some of the stuff is just, it's day by day basis. Like things change. Like a day is a long time in fishing. So unless it's like a water depth thing, there are spots where you get a pretty, like the topography is pretty flat. The water, the shoreline will be way out on a low tide, but it'll come in on a high tide and then it'll hit those rocks and then that spot will activate. But yeah, generally, if there's water there, low tide and high tide, I'll fish it anytime and just figure out what's happening. And yeah, I still get surprised all the time. Even I've got spots that I know when they'll work. You still go down there at an odd time just to have a look or something, and there's stuff happening, or yeah.
Yep.
So I like to be surprised, and I'll leave myself open to be surprised. So yeah, tide planning and stuff like that. I do prefer bigger tides if I can. Like a lot of that might have to do with the moon as well, just leading into the new or the full moon. You get a lot of things happening. Yeah, there's just that added tidal movement. I think it helps just initiate certain bait and stuff coming in and stuff like that.
It certainly forces bait to aggregate in particular areas when there's a bit of run, and so it tends to ball them up a bit tighter, and that gets the pelagics going a little bit. And the GTs and the coral trout, that's the thing, because they've got these little pockets of bait that are just easy picking. So
yeah,
that's, I suspect, part of the reason why a bit of tidal movement is a good thing. Mate, let's imagine I turned up on your doorstep tomorrow and said, Brett, let's go out and have a fish. If you kind of pick the perfect day in terms of wind, and you've given us a bit of an idea on tide, but in terms of wind and weather conditions, cloud cover, all that kind of stuff, what would make a perfect day to be out on the rocks casting at fish?
Yeah, for me, like slightly overcast, erring away from saying big tides, because some of my best catches have happened in neap tides. Yeah, so I think it really depends on the spot. If it's somewhere that is like north facing and you're getting like a big run in north, it's like more of a peninsula kind of rocky point, then you will get a lot of water movement ripping past that point. And so you'll get fish parked off it, waiting for that conveyor belt of bait and stuff like that. But if it's more of a bay area or a sheltered area, I find that fish on a neap tide, the water sits in there, gets clearer. So if the time of year too, like in winter, it'll be warmer in there because the water's not moving in from deeper areas. It's like sitting in the shallow area, getting baked by the sun, moving up, lapping up onto the shore, warming up on the rocks and stuff like that. So I find at this time of year in winter, especially, like sometimes bays on neap tides fish really well because it's like warm in there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't really say that like big tides is a major one, but it definitely does spur the food chain on a bit. That's for sure.
Yep. What about time of day? Is that important? We all like to fish dawn and dusk, and quite often we love to fish dawn and dusk when it matches up with our idea of whatever the perfect tide is. But is that important in the style of fishing that you do, or is it an all day, all seasons, all year round sort of a thing?
It very much is, but dawn and dusk is always going to be the peak times. But it's more when the dawn or dusk will line up with another corresponding factor. That's when you really see dawn and dusk activate. But just in general, yeah, as a general speaking, if you can be on the rocks or at your spot at dawn or dusk, you're in good stead for being at the best part of the day. That's for sure.
Yeah. And certainly in this part of the world, that's also a cooler part of the day, which can be a big factor to consider when you're fishing during the warmer months. Yeah. Okay, so you said if dawn and dusk coincides with some other factors, what are the other factors that come into play when you're looking at that scenario?
Yeah, so depending on your spot, so like your tidal run, so if it's like a north-facing point or something, like a run-in tides, good flow of water running from the north as the tide's running north to south on a run-in, or conversely, if it's a south-facing point, yeah, that south running run-out tide, stuff like that. If you're getting there on that, there's a good flow of water coming past there. Moon position's a good one. Rise, set, moon above, moon below, stuff like that. You find those things compound. The more ideal scenarios you can get to compound on top of each other, and that the fishing will just get better and better. So
yeah, okay. And in terms of structure, we've already talked about shallow water can fish really well, deep water can fish really well too. If you turn up to a spot, is there anything that you'd look at and go, yeah, I'm not even going to bother fishing there? Or is there anything you'd look at and go, oh, this is going to be fantastic, can't wait to cast a line in there? What are the main features and attractions that you'd look for in a prime spot?
The only thing that turns me off, I love a good presented lure, is like weed and stuff in the water. It's not that there's not fish there or they won't bite, but it just makes it less fun for me because I have to take the weed off the lure. I can't cast it. I lose confidence in my presentation. But aside from that, dirty water, clean water, yeah, shallow, deep, I'll fish it all. I'll just adjust the lure to suit. That's a good thing about having a good selection of lures with you, especially being a land-based fisherman. You just want to have a good variety of stuff with you and a couple of rods, ideally, that'll cover a few different techniques so you can just adjust your techniques to suit what's happening on the water.
Yeah, all right. I'm looking forward to having that conversation about rods and lures in just a moment, so that's really good. But I do want to come back. You mentioned clear water, dirty water, doesn't matter. Obviously, if you like your sight casting, then clear water's going to be your preference. Up here in Cairns, getting clear water land-based anywhere, it doesn't happen all that often. It's usually reasonably dirty up here. So if you were waiting for clear water, you just wouldn't get out at all. Let's wrap this part of the conversation up by just asking if there's anything else we need to know when it comes to knowing where to fish, when to fish, or when and where not to fish as well. Is there anything else we need to know that we haven't covered in the discussion so far?
I don't think so. Safety's a big one, especially up here with crocs and jellyfish, things like that. Just always keep that in your mind. And if something goes wrong, it's just a bit of a basic plan of what will happen if something goes pear-shaped. But aside from that, no, anywhere it's possibility of holding good fish. But again, some people have like a specific goal in mind, or they just want to catch like big fish or something like that. Some of us guys that have maybe got a bit more experience, we're pretty happy catching a wide variety of things. And like I said, I'll take a good selection of lures and stuff like that I can alter my techniques to suit. So there's times that I'll go out chasing one species and that'll just go out the window, especially if I'm looking at a new spot, and I'll just adjust my techniques to suit something different.
Yep, love that. Makes tons of sense to me. And as you say, there might be somebody out there who desperately wants to nail a big GT off the shore. That might be their goal. And so if they get there and there's no GT around, but there's a bunch of queenies or coral trout or something else, they might say, that doesn't appeal to me at all.
There's one thing I'll say about that too, which is a good tip for young players, is just fish. It only needs to be 1.5 meters to 2 meters of water to get big GTs. Like they will come into water that shallow that you'll see them head waking around. I've seen it many a time. You just fish for small fish, and what I do is you just hook them and play them out. Because if you think there might be big fish around, big predatory fish, it could be cod, big barracuda, big GTs, hooking small fish and just playing them out, having fun with them on lighter gear, you will soon find out if there is a large predator around. Because probably half a dozen times we've just switched to fishing for, I don't know if people are familiar, but ribbon fish like wolf herring on topwater lures, small topwaters, when nothing's happening on the larger fish front. And then all of a sudden you've got a 20 kilo GT trying to eat this freaking ribbon fish that you've just hooked on 10 pound. And then all you do is you just try and get the lure out of the ribbon fish as possible, pick up your heavy rod. And I've seen it happen. Put out a stick bait or pop or whatever's tied on, and next thing you're hooked up to a fish of your dreams.
Yeah. So there's two things going on here, folks. One is whenever you hook a small fish, there's a vibration going through the water that's going to excite a predatory fish. And I remember, I think it was Ron Taylor or Rodney Fox or someone like that was trying to film sharks on the Great Barrier Reef years ago, and the sharks were just swimming around amongst the schools of fish and everybody was happy and calm. And then they speared a fish and the sharks just went bananas, right? Because they had the vibration of this fish. So it excites the predators. The other thing, of course, is you just know if there's species like ribbonfish there, if there's species like fusiliers, if there's species like any of those smaller species that GTs are going to eat, it's a pretty safe bet if the GT isn't there right now, sooner or later they're going to be there because there's a food source.
That's
so
right.
That's where they're going to be looking and hunting. So
fatigue will set in on those scenarios. So you might have been there 6 hours from dawn and it's midday and you're like, nothing's happening here. So you just switch to mucking around with small fish. And then a couple of hours into that, like I said, you'll just suddenly they'll appear. And then that's all about just being able to capitalize, having a few different setups with you and a good range of tackle to adjust what suits. Yeah, but if you love fishing, again, you might have just had a great day out and you just spent half the day targeting GTs and you didn't get any, but you had a great time on the light game.
And it'd be a very fussy fisherman that would turn back a session on the coral trout or the queenfish or the finger mark or whatever because all they really wanted to catch was GT. I know there are people out there that are that focused, but the majority of us are quite happy to be catching fish. So let's move on and have a chat about tackle, mate, because I love that you said you want to bring a selection of tackle along so that you're able to capitalise on whatever comes your way.
Yep.
So walk us through what that looks like in terms of, let's start with rods, reels, lines and leaders first. What sort of gear are you carrying in those combos?
So if I'm not going too far, I will take 3 rods. So like an ultralight, a medium light, and then just a heavy. But a lot of the time it's just a medium and a heavy, which is like a PE 2 to 3. It's usually 30 to 40 pound mainline braid to a 40 to 60 pound leader. And that'll cover small top waters and soft plastics. And the one I use, it's a 9-foot 2-piece rod. It's an old Daiwa Sensor C jigger. That's one of my favorite rods. I love it. It's just caught me heaps of fish. And it'll do everything from jigs, soft plastics, small top waters. It's about 9 foot long. So even a lighter lure, like 20 grams or something, it'll send it out. That'll cover anything from like XL queenfish right down to 30 centimeter trout and stuff like that.
Yep.
But if I'm not going too far, I will take like an ultralight, so like a 10 to 15 pound mainline, 20 pound leader, and that'll be for like small tuskies, small like coral trout and stuff like that. That's the really finesse stuff. You do lose a fair bit if you're around coral, around sharp rocks with ultralight gear, like you are and you're just doing lures. Like it does cost money. That does come into it. So fishing ultralight, it is super fun and super rewarding, but sometimes it is costly. Like, they don't have to go far to get you down. And we've got some pretty hard fighting fish here, like even, small Spanish flag, stripies, stuff like that. We'll take a $30 lure off. So ultralight, it can become costly. So, that sort of PE 2 to 3 and then PE 6 to 8 stuff is what I generally take. I fish heavy for the big stuff. Like I've hooked some proper GTs before and just unstoppable stuff. And because I've ticked a fair few of that 20 kilo weight class off, like I really want to get that 30 or mid 30s to 40s fish and get them under. So these days, I'm PE 8, even up to PE 10 mainline. I've got a couple of bigger reels that I'll use. One's PE 8, one's PE 10. I'll use a PE 8 rod. I'm currently running the Daiwa Saltiga C85 P8 rod.
Okay.
It's a really good stick bait rod, not as good for the poppers that I like to use. So I'll sometimes use that, or I'll use a Demon Blood P5 to 8, which is a little bit stiffer. And these aren't super expensive rods either, guys. My gear is very modest. All my gear is mid-range. None of my gear is super expensive. My favorite rod there is probably that Demon Blood. It's P5 to 8. It's caught me like some huge Giant Trevally and a fair few of them now, and it's $400 or something like that. Like you can get them for $400, and I've lent on it. Like I'm 100 kilo. I'll lean on this thing on 30 kilo GTs and haven't been able to break it. So you don't have to spend heaps to chase some extraordinary class fish.
Those Demon Blood rods are bulletproof. I've got a lighter one that I use, and they're just bulletproof.
I've got three different sizes of them. I think they're fantastic. For what they're worth and what you get out of them, they're absolutely fantastic.
The other thing is, of course, when you're fishing on the rocks, is at some stage, if you do enough of it, you're going to fall on a rod, right?
Yes, yeah.
It's going to happen.
I've done a few, that's right.
And so you do want to have gear that's going to, take a bit of punishment, but you don't want to take the top shelf stuff because it is going to become a bit expensive and you're going to be in tears when you break your $1,000 rod. So that's all great. In terms of lines and leaders, mate, and particularly leaders, you've talked about the line class for the braid that matches the rods, but what leaders are you putting on your light, medium, and heavy gear?
Ultralight, I'll do 20 pound, and then my mid-range P3, I run between 40 pound and 60 pound.
Okay.
Even on land-based barra, 60 pound I find's enough.
Okay.
Yeah, you could go more, but I guess you get, I don't know, I just like to have a pretty good presentation with the lures and stuff and just make sure that the action's well. So yeah, I don't really go higher than 60 on that setup. And then I do a pretty steep jump from there. Like I do have like an 8,000 reel with 50 pound. I don't go to it very often, but yeah, the 50 to 80 pound, 50 pound mainline, 80 pound leader, I will use for swim baiting sometimes. I don't use that setup much. I generally use the 30 to 40 pound mainline and then just jump straight up to 80 pound. And then on that, I'll run 120 pound leader up to 200 pound leader. Yep. And that's just solely depending on really what I've got. I don't think at that stage, when you're throwing lures, to me, over 160 mil, you're getting up around 180 mil, 200 mil lures. I don't think leader really matters at that size, like, honestly. The one thing I pay attention to is just that the leader's fresh. So if I've got a 120 pound leader that's been on the reel for a week and it's got a heap of bad memory coil in it, I would prefer to use 220 pound leader that's just fresh off the spool. I don't know, I like fresh leader for some reason. That's just a big thing with me. I don't know if it matters, but that's a confidence thing for me. But anywhere between 120 and 200 pound on the heavy setup, and then just nice fresh stuff.
Are you a fluorocarbon fan or do you go mono for the leaders?
I go, just shock leader, mono. Yep. Okay. Fluorocarbon, I don't know. I have used it in the past, but yeah, I prefer just mono and shock.
Cool. All right, so look, that's a pretty good rundown. I think we've covered where to fish, we've covered when to fish, we've talked about tides, weather. We've now gone through and put together a basic kit, so we know that you take typically 2 rods with you. You take an ultralight rod sometimes if you're not travelling too far and you can carry a third one. Mm-hmm. Walk us through your lure selection now, mate, and we are going to focus a little bit here on GTs, but I do like the idea of maybe exploring some of that stuff we talked about earlier on and having a bit of a selection of gear as well in case the GTs aren't playing ball. So let's do the GT lure first and then talk about what else we could perhaps take along to throw around on the lighter rods if the GTs aren't around.
Okay, yep. Oh, so I'll start off saying, especially for land-based stuff, you do not need huge lures. Like 150 mil, 180 mil, I think is, for me, the sweet spot. I will use up to 240 mil stick baits and stuff. Does it make a difference? No. And this is from sight casting at them. I've sight casted at many GT and watched how they react. Size, I do not think matters. It's direction the lure is traveling. If they're feeding on a certain bait, I find size matters. But if they're just swimming past or something like that, I've never found that, contrary to a lot of information you'll get, I've never found that big lures outperform small lures. I don't know. Unless I've seen them chasing like large milkfish or something like that, that's when I'll grab out like a big stick bait. But a lot of my catches have come on that 180 mil size lures. I think a lot of people think you have to throw massive 130 gram, 200 mil stick baits and stuff. They've probably got their place, like in maybe deeper water, a bit more of a water presence. But yeah, a lot of people I think are a bit surprised that you don't need to run like huge lures for them. So I'm talking 180 mils is the sweet spot for me, and around 100 grams. So again, not super heavy. Maybe that's just the circumstances I've been under where I've seen GTs in the shallows and I've thrown big lures at them and they haven't really taken them. But the ones that I've thrown that mid-sized lure at, I've had better reactions.
And as the saying goes, and we've heard it a million times on this podcast, is that elephants eat peanuts. In fact, as I'm saying that, I'm having a flashback to a session I had with my brother-in-law up in Weipa many years ago, where The fish just weren't playing at all, but there was just a school of big eye trevally sitting on this point on a reef, and so we stopped to have lunch and just sling a few little 3-inch soft plastics at the big eye trevally. And I saw this GT that would have been probably 25 kilo from 100 metres away come across the reef, and I saw it lock onto his lure on 10-pound line from probably 20 metres away and accelerate, and you just knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
This GT travelled probably close to 40, 50 metres locked onto a 3-inch soft plastic lure, and of course that fight lasted about 3 microseconds, but it was pretty spectacular for that 3 microseconds.
And it's those little observations, that inform your decisions. But I guess the only thing that would contradict what I said there is just if you see that there's just one type of bait in the area, or they're feeding on that type of bait, then definitely match the size to that. But in general, like a very moderately sized GT lure is all you need.
And that's great from a number of perspectives. One is it's a bit easier on the pocket because obviously the bigger they get, GT lures generally don't come cheap. So the bigger they get, the more they cost.
That's right.
But also it becomes hard work casting and retrieving those big lures.
Exactly.
Wears you out a lot quicker. So if you can get away with using smaller ones and they're as effective or even more so, well, that's fantastic.
Yeah, management of fatigue is an important part of putting in those casts. So if you're just going to burn out throwing 130, 150 gram lures, you're going to get outfished by someone throwing an 80 gram, 100 gram lure because they're just going to be putting in more casts and putting in more effort. And
Yep, absolutely. So walk us through what you're looking for in terms of lures. You've mentioned stick baits a couple of times. You've mentioned poppers a couple of times. You haven't mentioned any specific brands or whatever, but we've talked about sizes and weights. But what do you look for? What makes a good GT lure?
So for land-based, I like poppers. I find stick baits to be highly entertaining. So they're the funnest lure to use for me. But there's something about poppers. I don't know what it is. GTs and even queenfish, big queenfish, they love poppers. I don't know if it's just they notice it quicker or it gets their attention more. So poppers, specifically tuna-style poppers, so what you'd call like a small to mid-sized cup. I think the big blooping poppers are more for deep water, boat guys, pressure edges, stuff like that. Spots where there's large marauding fish anyway, but I find fish to be quite shy land-based a lot of the time. I don't know if that's an accurate assumption, but I see a lot of guys pull up for a lot of first cast. They'll raise fish first cast on these pressure edges and stuff, fishing from boats, from what I've seen on videos and stuff like that. It's generally like you're already casting and you're already making a bit of a ruckus when you're land-based, and then they'll come through once you're there. Sometimes they're there already, but a lot of times they're coming through. So I find if you're making too big a ruckus, it'll spook fish that are going to come into the area. They might come and investigate, but sometimes I think it's too much. So the smaller cups, like the tuna style, they're not as intrusive on an area. In my opinion, I think fish feed off each other's like body language. They don't obviously talk, but if your big popper is spooking the bait or the other fish in the area, their body language, any other fish that might be a more desirable species, like a large pelagic or GT or queenfish, what have you, they'll feed off of that energy as well. So sometimes I think that those bigger poppers, they might just be disrupting the area too much and like spooking fish. So I'll use a tuna style popper, like I said, and I won't be absolutely slamming it into water. I'll be giving it a couple of decent pops, and I'll be giving it a few stabs and started walk across the top, and then I might give it another couple of pops, and then I might just wind it for a bit, and I'll really use it in this weird kind of quasi stick bait popper type of a fashion. And especially those small stabs and just the little splashing across the top. Especially up here, we get a lot of milkfish and diamond scale mullet mill on the surface and suck at the surface a lot. So whether it's imitating that or not, I'm not sure, but I've had multiple times fish come up and eat the popper, and it's just doing this little dance across the top. There's a couple of videos on my Instagram like where you'll see that technique, and people have commented on it and talked to me about it. And it's not always just slamming this huge popper into the water and creating these massive explosions. That obviously has its merit in certain things, but that's generally not how I use a popper.
Okay. No, that's really good advice. I think you're right. Those big gooseneck poppers, they're really designed to make as much commotion as possible, and that's necessary if the fish are down deep or you've got to attract them to the spot. You're fishing in shallow water here, right? And the fish when they come into shallow water, they're acutely aware of what's going on around them. They're on the alert for any kind of disturbance or any kind of sound that might be either a food source or a threat, right? So they're going to respond to that. So if you start splashing around those massive big poppers, yeah, I think you're probably quite right. You probably would spook a lot of fish and also spook the bait out of the area. Once you've scattered the bait, then the fish are going to move on as well. So some pretty good advice there, mate. Let's talk about other lure styles, though. So obviously you like your poppers, 180mm poppers, tuna style, not too much noise. You've given us a pretty good sort of idea about how you work those. What other lures do you keep in the arsenal for GTs for those days when perhaps a popper's not doing the job?
Yeah, so I'll always pack my
Yep.
lure box the same. It'll be 2 sinking stick baits, 2 floating stick baits, 2 poppers, and if it's windy, a bibbed minnow. And then just depending on the conditions, I'll use whatever. But yeah, generally the bibbed minnow and the sinking stick baits, if it's windy, they'll just hold in the water obviously a bit better. But if it's calm and still, it'll be a floating stick bait just because it's not as intrusive and it'll still get noticed as well as a popper. But popper, I'll always try it in any conditions. But yeah, so sinking stick baits, especially if there's a crosswind or something like that, like a big bow in the line, that'll help you keep connected to it. And then, yeah, the bibbed minnow the same, I find. Haven't had great success on the bibbed lures, but I always bring one if the wind's going to be up.
All right, and in terms of terminals, there's that perennial debate with the GT guys about whether to rig up with trebles, whether to rig up with singles, barbed or barbless, all that sort of stuff. Give us a bit of an idea of what sort of terminals you put on your lures.
Yeah, I do run singles, but I rather assist singles, so with the Kevlar cord on them. There's just a bit of freer movement in them than just like a rigid sort of single setup. 200-pound split rings. It's a good idea, especially if you're spending over $100 on a lure, and they can be in excess of $150, $200. Sometimes it's good to just have your heavy main line to a solid ring, 300-pound odd to a 200-pound split ring to link to your lure, and then have your hooks linked on with like a 150-pound split ring. So you have these like weak points where if shit goes bad, you'll just lose your hook. You won't lose your lure. So I don't generally do that these days, but that's a good one too if people are worried about cost of stuff like that, because some of the lures, we all love buying good lures. You really don't want to see them lost, especially across shallow, rocky ground. But generally I'll run trebles, and 200-pound split rings. I will go down to 150-pound split rings sometimes, but I've had them fail. If you spend enough time in the water and you chase those GTs, you will hook big ones, and they're an eye-opener.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-boggling. I've seen it and I've experienced it, but it's still pretty mind-boggling to think of 150-pound split ring being opened up, but it happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right, mate. So anything else we need to know about lures for GTs?
Just confidence. So if you like bright lures, if you like natural lures, throw natural lures. Like I touched on, I'll generally bring 2 of each category, and I love white lures. That gives me confidence. So most of my tackle box will be white, but a lot of the times my white will be my natural, or it'll be like an actual natural baitfish pattern, and then a bright. Especially if you're going to fish dawn or dusk or it's overcast, always have a bright one. That can really make the difference. Bright or just a weird coloration. I caught a 1.5 meter queenie a couple of weeks ago on a Nemo pattern. Like, just, you'd never see a freaking Nemo. Like, it's just the weirdest color. Yeah, but yeah, even queenfish and stuff like that will still eat these odd colors. I don't know what it is. It's just something different. Like, they always target that different fish in the school.
Yep.
Confidence is key. That's the one thing. So whatever you're happy with, throw. But there's no definite lure type or choice that you should throw. But white is my favourite.
And look, for those who are having a look at your profile, mate, they could be forgiven for thinking that every time you go out, within a few casts, you can hook onto a GT. How much time? Are they the fish of 1,000 casts? How much time do you spend casting? How many casts do you put in and not get a result before you either move on or change lures or that sort of stuff? What's your kind of strategy for all of that?
You're going to come home empty-handed. I guess just touch back on being versatile in your techniques and what you're happy with. Just go out happy, being happy to fish. Enjoy the process. So you might go out looking for GTs, but if you need to switch to soft plastics for a bit, like change techniques and target something else, it's just what you have to do. And then that'll just keep you on the water. If you just go out with GT gear, you're going to come home empty-handed a lot, and you're going to be disheartened. And then it's also going to be fatiguing throwing GT gear all day. So you definitely you want to persist, of course, but taking those lighter rods or rods and just falling back on different fishing styles while you're out there, that just keeps you entertained on the water and casting until the time is that they come through, or the conditions, the stars align, as it may be. So just being versatile and stuff like that, that's where it's at. But you're gonna come home empty-handed a lot. And then again, you might go for months. We'll go for months, and then you'll hook one, and you'll just get absolutely smoked like that. The amount of, and it can be quite challenging, like mentally. Like you will lose money, and that's a lot of effort that you feel like's down the drain. So it can be a bit of a mental challenge, like the land-based GT thing. That's one of those things that you really appreciate it when you pull it off because of all the hardships involved. I think that's probably the best thing about it, is that it's so hard, and you will lose. Like you will lose, and it's not this type of fishing where it's just the hardest thing is to get the fish to eat, and then the rest is easy. Every part of it's difficult.
And I'm glad you related all that to us, mate. That was exactly what I was trying to get at. I want to keep it real. I don't want to get this kind of romantic idea that they're going to go out the first time. And it could happen, but the odds are it won't. That you're going to go out the first time, spend a couple of hours, just casually casting a few lures, get a couple of big GTs and go home. That's not normally the way it works.
So I think my strength in fishing is I dabble in illustration and stuff like that, and there's this thing in that world is where you just have to enjoy the process. Don't worry about the end result. You don't really want to climb a mountain for the view at the top. You want to enjoy that climb. So you just got to enjoy the process. So one thing is find a technique or style that you enjoy doing, like you actually enjoy doing it. And then that'll just keep you going back and on the water and doing that technique, and the results will follow. You might have to try several spots and different times and stuff like that, but it won't be such a heartbreaking thing because you're enjoying what you're doing while you're working at that goal. And just every time you go, you'll just edge closer to that goal.
Yeah, like you say, it's the same as, enjoying the journey and not being so focused on the destination.
That's it. I think that's all that I bring to the table. That's all I've ever done.
Yeah, cool. All right, mate, I'd like to have a bit of a chat about lures for your lighter gear, and these could end up being GT lures, because we all know that when you're fishing in these scenarios, you don't get to choose what takes your lure, and sometimes what you didn't intend to take your lure might take it. On those days when the GT are a bit quiet and you're throwing some smaller lures around and chasing a few barra or queenies or whatever else might be about, coral trout or fingeries or whatever, what sort of lures do you typically throw around for those?
I still enjoy top waters in that scenario. Specifically, walk the dog lures, 100 mil to 130 mil. They're fun to use. You're putting in pauses and you're counting your walks. You might walk in sets of 3 and stop. You might just go even numbers. Sometimes I'll go 3 walks, pause, 5 pause, 8 pause, back to 3. And all of that stuff, it just keeps the mind active. Or you'll just do straight walks back. Counting your walking and stuff like that with the walk the dog lures, I love doing it. That'll keep me entertained. Like I said, enjoy the process. That'll keep me entertained for ages. So medium-sized walk the dog lure. I will go to soft baits. I try not to hug the bottom too much. I tend to get fairly frustrated with snags, being that I have a preference for top water. Yeah. And I will throw the odd small popper, but generally my mid-sized stuff, it's all, walk the dog stick baits. They're so effective and so fun to use. So I get great enjoyment just using those lures. But I'm a bit of a fishing lure enthusiast, so I've got every manner of lure. They're just the ones I gravitate to. I always take divers, soft plastics, walk the dog, small poppers on that mid-range stuff as well, but I'll sit there for hours throwing walk the dog lures. Like you can cover so much ground, and they're too much fun.
Yeah, they're a great prospecting lure, and you can just pepper any bommies or structure or sand patches or whatever it might be. You just pepper them.
That's it.
Cover the water thoroughly, and you'll find fish sooner or later.
That's it. Yep. No, they're a great option, and I would never leave home without one. tackle box. Yeah, specifically that 100 to 130 mil size.
Excellent. All right, mate. Hey, I think we're probably getting towards the end of this conversation. I do have one more question I want to ask you. I just want to remind our listeners, though, that there are some show notes for this episode over at the website at doclures.com, so go and check that out. Find there's an MP3 there you can download. There's a PDF you can download as well. And there'll be social media links there as well, so you can go and check out Brett's Instagram profile and see what attracted me to having him on the show. Although you've already heard what attracted me to having him on the show. He's a very knowledgeable guy. No nonsense, no frills, just serious, solid fishing for serious, solid fish. So it's been a great chat in that regard. But definitely get over to doclures.com and get yourself onto the website there and get all the information, show notes, and all that kind of stuff. Now, Brett, I'm going to round this interview out now with one final question, and it's one that I often ask GT guys, but it's going to be a little bit interesting for land-based, I think perhaps even more so than usual, and that is, give us a few tips for landing that GT. So we've talked a lot about finding them. We've talked a lot about what lures to use, what techniques to use to get them to take that lure. You did mention right back at the very start, before you've even launched that lure, you're looking for what's the fish's path. Where's it going to go when it hits this lure? And how am I going to get it out of structure? But give us some techniques for land-based fishing for fighting a GT and actually getting it up to the point where you can lift it out of the water, get a photo, and then put it back.
All right, great question. So what I touched on earlier is he's generally going to, whichever way you're putting pressure on him, he's going to go the other way. So you can use that to your advantage, both with the eat. So he's going to run into open ground. It's worked for him multiple times. So there might be fish sitting in front of rocks, and if I casted directly at it, it'd just eat and just go straight over the reef. But casting off into the open ground and then working the lure sort of back towards myself and getting his attention, and then he's eating there, but he's just going to run away from where the pressure is. So he's just going to run into open ground, and it's worked for me multiple times. And so that'll work in the fight as well. If you've got one, you're tied on it, and it's arcing around towards a bommy, your first instinct is to try and pull it away from that, going to that direction. And when they're over 20 kilo, 25, 30 kilo, if you're getting up to there, they're generally in control, even on PE8 gear, PE10 gear. They'll get there if they want. So it's hard to do it, but you really have to skip across those rocks, get ahead of it, and put that pressure back towards where you don't want it to go. And it works. It's amazing. It works. And he'll just turn and just go back out into the open area just because he'll think that you're pulling him towards there. I'm not going to go there. You do get some exceptionally smart fish, and you do get some dumb ones. I've seen them do dumb things. I've seen them do incredibly smart things in terms of fighting. So that you do get some that are really smart that you're not going to get, or you do get some that make mistakes where they'll have the chance to get you, but you'll still get him over that bomby that's between you and him. So it does happen. Being in control is a big one for me. So when I started, I used to, before my session, so I tie my leader to a solid ring and then to a split ring. I'll just hook that onto the tray of my ute, and I'll lean on it. A lot of people don't like that scenario, like putting heaps of pressure on knots and gear and stuff before fishing. They want their knots to be like semi-tensioned or something, or the gear not to be understrained, like the line and knots not to be understrained before any sort of big fight. I'll hook it up, set it to the drag I want. And we used to even hook it up to scales and then check our drags under 8 kilo pressure was where we used to, 5 to 8 kilo was starting drag. And walk backwards with it and then have your mates read the scale. So we used to do that stuff and just check that all your line's fine. And that's going to give you confidence to be in control of the fish. So if you're unsure and you're just thinking like you want to be in control but you're unsure, hook your line up to a tree or ute tray, whatever. Set your drag to where you think it is and lean back on it and then walk backwards. And I've had line break like that in weird spots, like just the main line will break once you've gotten back by 20 steps. But I don't know. I find that's a really good confidence thing with the gear. Like once you figure out, okay, I can handle that drag, all my knots and everything held up on that drag is going to be sufficient to really put hurt on a fish. And when you hook that fish, you've got super confidence to be in control. And then that's the main thing, is just being in control, especially in that usually if you're getting it close to yourself on the rocks, there's all sorts of obstacles around. Spot dependent, of course, but and then you'll just have the confidence to be in control. And sometimes contrary to other forms of fishing, like you might get it close to the boat or the fish close, and you'll back off the drag. Sometimes you're tightening the drag up as you get it close because there's so many obstacles. And that just gives you confidence to do that kind of thing. So, yeah, there's been many times where I've fought a fish in close and then it's made a mad dash. That last bit of energy they'd like to expend trying to get you close in, and you can just grab the spool and, you'll have confidence that nothing will break. And that's a big one. So just having the confidence to control the fish, having confidence in your gear, that's a major one. Just make sure your hooks and everything are fairly strong. For GT stuff, 4.0 minimum. I like 5.0s. You can go bigger, but they can diminish or inhibit your lure action and presentation as well. So, strong hooks. And test your gear. Don't be afraid to test it. Lean on it.
Awesome stuff. One of the techniques that we hear quite a lot, and it's actually something that I learned the hard way on kingfish in southeast Queensland, is the harder you go at them, the harder they come back at you. And so in a lot of scenarios, this is boat fishing, a lot of scenarios, if you back the drag right off, they'll come quietly away from structure, and then you can pump the drag back up and play them in clear water. You don't really have that kind of luxury land-based, or do you?
It's definitely dependent on the spot and stuff, but a lot of this time, I think I would prefer to be in control. But definitely if it's headed to an area, I know he's going to get there. If you usually can't as quick, but you can back the drag off. And then if even under a light drag, like he won't bust 200-pound leader or 120 to 200-pound leader unless it's under high tension. They won't really sometimes. So sometimes you'll get away with them touching a little bit of structure if that's the case. But I would rather bend a hook out trying to stop a GT to get to structure than have it get there and have to back the drag off or something like that. But I know what you're saying. I have heard that. It's generally quite a fast-paced, quick decisions type of a deal. Land-based, it's all happening quick. It's fairly shallow water. Like it's usually 3 to 8 meters where you're fishing like that. They'll get down quick.
The difference is boat fishing, especially if you can get on top of them, it's a vertical fight. And so they've got to swim a long way against vertical drag to be able to get to structure. But when you're land-based fishing, your line's out horizontally, and it can be shallow water, and there can be snags dotted anywhere. And so the more line you've got out, the greater chance there is that line's going to touch something. And when you're talking braided line and sharp coral, it doesn't take much of a touch for that line to be cut. So it doesn't surprise me to hear you say, no, I generally prefer to crank the drag up and really take control of the fight and try and get that fish in as quickly as I can.
No, just being in control, I find if you can and you get good at it, that's what really lends to being successful. The more you let the fish be in control, like obviously the more times he's going to get to where you don't want him to be, and he's going to be dictating the terms of the fight. So if you can be in control and dictating the terms of what's going on, both with your positioning on the rocks, like I said, putting tension against him where you don't want him to go, so try and keep him where you want and stuff like that. Like that'll keep you in good stead of getting him to where you want him to be in the position on the rocks in your hands for a photo. But it's weird that if you hook them on the side of the face and stuff, they'll go so much harder than like a clean corner of the mouth hook up. So there's a lot of variables there, as with a lot of fishing, but control, I find, will edge the bet in your favour.
Terrific stuff. So don't muck around with them, folks. They're serious fish. They need a firm hand, particularly land-based. So, Brett, this has been a fantastic conversation, mate. I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. I've learned a ton. I'm sure there's a bunch of listeners out there that are going to be really grateful for what you shared today. Yeah, you came on board saying, I'm not really a technical fisherman, but, mate, you have given us tons and tons of value that will help people to hopefully land their first GT off the shore, but if not, certainly to put themselves in a position where they've got some chance of doing so. Mate, thanks so much for coming on board. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge, and I look forward to seeing more fish pop up on your profile in the weeks, months and years to come.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Greg.
Thanks for listening to the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast. For free show notes, downloads, tools and resources, please visit our website on doclures.com or consider supporting the show by joining Team Doc Lures to receive exclusive members-only episodes, tools and resources. But for now, tight lines and may the fish be with you.